I'm Kelsey, this is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I am doing the second of Leah Cooper's monthly book recs. This is a new Goodreads group she's created where there are monthly recommendation prompts. I'll link the group down below so you can check it out. Last month I did my first video for this group on the very last day of the month. Last month's topic was wintry reads, and this month it turns out I am also filming my video on the very last day of the month. We'll see if this continues to be a pattern. This month's topic for March is queer authors, and I was really glad to see that this was the topic for March. Because I kind of depend on recommendation prompts coming up on a regular basis for queer books and books by authors of color and diverse books of all sorts. I depend on those prompts coming up on a fairly regular basis so that I can do a check-in sort of for myself to see how diverse my reading is lately. And for a couple years there were diversity-related topics in the BookTube SFF Babbles, and there aren't this year. So this is, for queer books at least, sort of filling a gap in my regular annual BookTube content. Last year the Babbles had, I think, an Own Voices topic for all sorts of diversity, sort of in one topic, but specifically Own Voices books. The year before, I think there were separate topics for books featuring queer characters and books featuring characters of color that didn't specify anything about the authors. So each time these topics have come up, I've sort of had to talk a little bit about how I feel about recommending books with certain types of representation and books by certain types of authors. And one of the things that I've sort of mentioned as almost a disclaimer is that it is harder sometimes to identify who is and isn't a queer author than it is to identify and know who is, for example, an author of color. If that information isn't readily available in someone's bio or on their website, or if you haven't been following them on social media where they talk a lot about their identity, like, there might not be an easy way to know. So all that to say, coming around to this video and my recommendations list, I am looking back on books that I've read over approximately the past year since I last did an Own Voices recommendations video, because I don't want to keep recommending the same books over and over again, and I like this sort of annual check-in concept. But because the topic is queer authors, I am only listing books by authors who I know are absolutely 100% certainly queer. There may be some worthy authors and books here falling through the cracks, as there may have been last year as well with that Own Voices recommendations video. So in the first part of this video, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be recommending some queer authors whose books I have read and liked in the past year or so. And then there's also going to be a second part of this video at the end, and I'll explain what that's going to be when I get there. So first on this list is actually a graphic novelist. That is Tillie Walden. I am recommending on a Sunbeam. I think it's probably going to be the most appealing book of hers for speculative fiction readers. I have since also read Are You Listening?, which also has a sort of speculative fabulist element to it, but it didn't appeal to me as strongly as On a Sunbeam did. And I've not yet read her first book, Spinning, which I think is a graphic memoir. But I think all of her books feature queer women. On a Sunbeam, because this is the one I'm particularly recommending, takes place in a sci-fi universe where there don't seem to be any men, and all of the romantic relationships are female-female romantic relationships. It's a kind of beautiful, surreal-ish, teenage love story adventure in space. Next is an author who is a repeat author from my Own Voices recommendations video last year, and that is J.Y. Yang, author of the Tensorate novella series. They have recently changed their name. They now go by Neon and will henceforth be publishing as J.Y. Neon Yang. J.Y. Neon Yang is a non-binary author, and they're a repeat on this list from last year because I continued on with the Tensorate series. So last year I talked about the Black Tides of Heaven, which is the first book in this novella companion series that's silk punk fantasy that does interesting things with gender. And I liked that book but wasn't as enamored of it as I think some other people were. However, I did then go on to read The Red Threads of Fortune, which I really loved. I liked this better than the first one. It was a really compelling character story for me that I found very moving. I do have the third book out from the library, and I will be continuing on with this series. Next is another non-binary author, Rivers Solomon, whose debut novel, An Unkindness of Ghosts, is very queer and very character-driven in a way that I feel is sometimes overshadowed in discussions of this book by the discussion of, race and slavery that's very forefront. This is a dystopian generationship story where society has come to resemble the antebellum American South. So there's obviously a lot of themes about social injustice in here, and it's a very compelling debut novel. I've not yet read The Deep, which is their novella based on the clipping song of the same name that came out last year. I still hope to get to that. The next author on this list is one I bet I've recommended before in some sort of queer books recommendation list, and that is Charlie Jane Anders, author of both All the Birds in the Sky and this one, The City in the Middle of the Night, which was the one that was published in 2019 that I read most recently. Charlie Jane Anders is a trans woman, and I think there is more prominent queerness in The City in the Middle of the Night than there was in All the Birds in the Sky. The character who I think of as the main protagonist of this book is a queer woman. This is science fiction that is weird and weighty. It's very political. It's dealing with some flawed human governments on a very inhospitable planet, and it also has a sort of a first contact narrative. This is one I haven't wrapped up yet since I've read it, so I will be talking about it more on this channel. And then next is an author whose work I read for the first time this month, so I've just read this book and haven't wrapped it up yet. This is Katharine Duckett, and the book is Miranda in Milan, which is a novella that is a queer sequel to Shakespeare's Tempest. This book gives Miranda an alternate lady love interest, and it casts a rather dark light on Prospero as a character and all of his motivations. Next on this list is a non-binary author whose work I've recently read for the first time. That's Akwaeke Emezi. The book I have read is Pet, which is their first young adult novel. This is really unusual YA. This is not the sort of thing that you normally think of as young adult speculative fiction, but it is such a cool little book. This is a really powerfully written sort of societal thought experiment of a book that posits a city that has solved a lot of the social problems that plague our world today, and asks what happens when those evils start to return. And the main character of this book is a trans girl who lives in a society where that is 100% accepted and supported by everyone she knows. I now do really want to go back and read their adult novel Freshwater, although that book still intimidates me because I know it has some really heavy subject matter. So here we are coming to that second half of the video that I promised at the beginning. And this is something that I've sort of felt I needed to make a video on, sort of to correct the record for me and my channel, and I think it fit really well here as part of this video. And these are 4 authors, all of them non-binary, who have either come out as non-binary and started using they/them pronouns since I've been discussing and reviewing their books on this channel, or I have no idea when they came out publicly as non-binary and started using they/them pronouns, and so I don't know if that information was available to me somewhere when I started reviewing their books and misgendered them in the process. So this is something I felt I needed to do on my channel as a bit of a setting the record straight, to have a little chat about this, because my videos are out there and they're not something that can be retroactively edited. What I am doing is going back and putting an edit in the description box for any review videos that I have of these authors' books, saying either that this person's pronouns have changed since I made this video, or I've become aware that this person uses different pronouns since I made this video. I think that's sort of the deal I've made with myself for how I'm going to handle that sort of past video content. And then I also just want to put out the statement that if you as a viewer happen to see a video of mine, either a backlist video from long ago or a new recent one, where you notice that I use inaccurate or out-of-date pronouns for any author, please, please, please feel free to drop me a comment to that effect, and I will add such a disclaimer to the description section of that video. If I haven't already done so. So this is slightly in uncomfortable yikes I screwed up territory. In a couple of these cases I absolutely could not have known because these authors have come out as non-binary or publicly started using different pronouns since I have been reading their work and talking about their work. So I'm going to start with the easy ones for me, which also happen to be the 2 whose books I did read in the past year, so they would have been on this list anyways. The first is Alexandra Rowland, author of A Conspiracy of Truths, and it's a standalone sequel, A Choir of Lies, which is the book that I recently read. Alexandra Rowland identifies as non-binary and has sort of been gradually shifting over to using they/them pronouns instead of she/her pronouns over the last while, and that's something that they've talked about on Twitter, where I follow them. But about these books, they take place in a world that has lots of queer characters and a lot of different cultures that view gender and sexuality all very differently. I absolutely loved A Choir of Lies. I liked A Conspiracy of Truths. I appreciated way more about it than I disliked, and then this one just really it spoke to me. It was a very compelling character story for me that's told in a way that I think will appeal to some people and not to others. This is a book that may not be for everyone, but I loved it, and it was a 5-star read for me. And then next is one of my all-time favorite authors, Annalee McLemore, who recently came out as non-binary and has started using they/them pronouns. The book of theirs that I actually read in the past year and therefore should be holding up instead of this one is The Weight of Feathers, which is their debut novel. This is Blanca y Roja, their second to most recently published book. Their most recently published one I haven't read yet, that is Dark and Deepest Red. But I am holding up this one and not The Weight of Feathers, because The Weight of Feathers is their only book that does not have queer representation in it. So if you're looking for queer representation specifically, go for literally any of McLemore's books except for The Weight of Feathers. All of their books are beautifully written, magical realism YA standalones that have varying degrees of fairy tale influence, and I love them all. And then next are two authors who have newly published books that are on my TBR that I really want to read, but I have not read any books of theirs since their earlier published works. And they are two authors for whom I'm not sure when or how they came out as non-binary and how I missed it, but I was unaware when I first reviewed their work on this channel, and I need to correct the record. So first is Annalee Newitz, author of Autonomous and The Future of Another Timeline. I reviewed Autonomous when it was first released. This was their debut novel. This is a cyberpunk adult sci-fi standalone. This one does deal with non-binary gender a bit, though with a non-human character. One of the point of view characters is a bot who doesn't feel that human gender applies to them in the same way it applies to humans. And then I do eventually intend to read Newitz's second novel, The Future of Another Timeline, though I haven't yet gotten my hands on a copy of it. And then the last author on this list is Sarah Gailey, whose American Hippo novellas, River of Teeth and Taste of Marrow, I did a series review for on this channel sometime before I realized that Gailey identified as non-binary. That would have been nice to know when I did that review, because there is a major character in those books who is non-binary, and I would have liked to have been able to recommend that representation as own voices. But either I did not do my research, or Gailey was not yet identifying themselves that way, and I don't know which it is. But I am super pumped to read Sarah Gailey's debut novel, Magic for Liars, which I went to a release event for last year, and I heard them talk about the book, and it's literally sitting right there. I'm looking at it. I want to read it. I don't know when I'm going to have time. And then I think they've either just come out with or have coming out soon. I think it was just recently released, a young adult novel that also looks really intriguing called When We Were Magic. So Sarah Gailey is an author I'll definitely be reading more of in the near future. So that kind of concludes the part 2 of this video. This is obviously not meant to be a comprehensive list of queer authors I recommend. This is mostly just people whose work I've read and loved in the past year. Let me know if any of these authors are also on your radar, if you've read their books. If you've read books by these authors that I've not yet read, let me know what you think. If you have any queer authors whose work you think I'd like, I'd love to hear recommendations. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.